Hello again, everyone. So thank you for joining us in the second week of this MOOC. We've really enjoyed reading your comments again and watching you engage in the course. And we hope you found overall that the 2 weeks of this MOOC have been really useful in terms of both thinking about your own teaching practices, thinking about potential new teaching practices, and also sharing your ideas with us. We've certainly learned lots of new things. So myself, Sonia and Amina are going to talk about some of the things that we found particularly interesting this week. We've only got a few minutes, so obviously we can't discuss all of them, so we're just going to focus on a couple of things. So the thing that I wanted to talk about was your approaches to multilingual English language teaching classrooms. So the vast majority of you, so 86% of you, said that you thought that multilingual classrooms were the way to teach English. And you all had lots of interesting ideas about that to do with the value of people's first languages, how they can support learning, how they can also link to people's cultures, etc. So there were lots of, I thought, really good ideas there about how other languages and multilingualism provide a supportive learning environment and also a culturally and linguistically rich learning environment. And I thought another important point to emphasize was that when we think about the English within a multilingual approach to teaching English, it's really crucial that we think of English as being very variable. So when we talk about the English, we don't switch from one language to a kind of US or UK or other kind of standard English. The English that we'd expect multilingual people to be using is very variable. And we know from Global English's research that that's how successful communicators of English as a lingua franca use English. They use it in a very flexible way that's adapted to the settings they're in. So I think as teachers, it's really important that we think about when we do teach English, what kind of English we're teaching, and that we tailor it to our particular settings and our learners as well. And I also thought it was interesting that some of you brought up comments about there are times when it has to be English only. And I think that's a really important point to think about. So, of course, when we talk about multilingual classrooms, that doesn't mean there aren't times when you want the learners to use English, or if you're teaching another language, any other target language. Of course, there are times when it's beneficial to use that one language as the kind of predominant language perhaps of the class. Yeah, that might be because you're preparing learners for an exam like IELTS, which doesn't accept multilingual approaches. But at the same time, it's also important to recognise that even if the main language of the class, for example, is English, that doesn't mean it has to be the only language. So something we found a lot in our research is that often classes, particularly in higher education, that say they're English only, actually there might be English as the kind of main language that the teacher and the students are using together, and the students when they're talking to other students in kind of class group work. But what we see in the actual work outside of that, so what's often called the kind of side work or the backstage, is lots of multilingualism still. So when you send students off into groups, they can use their first language to discuss it, they can use the various resources they've got, and then feed back to the group in English. So I think it's important to recognise multilingualism and also the way that multilingualism works with a kind of variable global Englishes approach. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Sonia now, who's going to talk about what she thought about this week.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Will. And thank you also to all the colleagues that are joining us this second week. I've also very much enjoyed reading your comments and learning from your stories. Something that caught my attention is that increasingly more and more English language teachers are expressing positive views of approaches that prioritize intelligibility among their students over native-like imitation or over nativeness in the performance of the students in the class. I think that's obviously a very interesting development. I think in the past we used to see teachers feeling a bit more resistant to this idea, perhaps not sure of how it would work in class or what would be the implications. But it's great to see also some teachers trying to avoid talking to their students and sort of framing English around the native, non-native dichotomy. It's really good to see these ideas are beginning to arrive to the classrooms as well. Something that sort of came to my mind when I was reading those stories is to what extent we actually know how our students feel and what it is that they think. To what extent are we trying to teach them and in a way that prioritizes intelligibility and diversity, but maybe are they following us with these ideas, or are they still attaching prestige to native speaker norms, and are they thinking about their alternative English practices as sort of tolerable or acceptable rather than equally legitimate ways that they should potentially be proud of using as long as they can make themselves understood. So basically, to what extent we potentially as teachers can build spaces to have these conversations with our students, to check what the conceptualizations are, and to maybe challenge potential status quo colonializing ideas that may still be operating. And the same thought popped in my head around whether we have these conversations with our colleagues in our own departments. I could notice that some of the colleagues in the MOOC seem to have departments that are sort of more decolonial in orientation, whereas others were saying, no, I do this in my class, but my entire department and our assessment strategy is very native speaker focused. So I was wondering, okay, maybe you guys can tell us more about how we can move from independently applying these ideas in our classroom to having more discussions with our colleagues and maybe potentially coming up with collective responses as a department to how we might decolonize CLT together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Sonia, for sharing, especially the last point about institutional kind of, challenges or fear to kind of implement that change. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for moving on to week 2 and sharing their insights and answers. It was nice to see that many of our participants liked the idea of moving on to the practicality of how to apply those decolonial ideas in the classrooms. How can they adjust cultural content and apply implement more multilingual practices in their classrooms. So I've seen that some people shared their experiences of redesigning materials completely to kind of reflect local needs, practices, traditions, and so on. But what I would like to say is that we do not need to necessarily think about changing everything, but maybe small steps of change can really matter and make a difference. We see how it works, and then we go from there. Some other things that was interesting in the comments was people talking about how about the dominant kind of monolingual ideologies or perceptions, attitudes within my environment, institution. How do I address that? How those kind of systematic or system barriers. So what I would say is that from my own experience in EAP teaching, it worked for me when I just opened that conversation, especially that it actually came from the students who were looking at some of the texts in our EAP materials, and they were like, we feel that some of this content is somehow culturally hegemonic or homogeneous. So I just went to the line manager, we spoke about it. We involved other EAP tutors, and they were actually open and happy to kind of change those texts to make them more kind of inclusive and reflective of our learners' cultural and linguistic realities. So I think what I would advise everyone is maybe try to open that conversation, see how it goes, because I think many institutions are interested in improving the quality of education and staying kind of up to date with current research, philosophies and updates and so on. So that's all I wanted to say. Just one last thing. So we would like you to please take a time to complete the survey. The link is at the end of the first week, and I also put it at the beginning of the second week. So we really would love to hear you, to see your answers. The survey is about how did you feel about the course, how did it influence your perceptions and so on. So if you want to keep in touch with us, feel free to get in touch via our Facebook page. We also have got our contact details on the survey as well. Thanks everyone, and we look forward to maybe seeing more comments from you by the end of this week. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.